How's it going? I don't know if you have heard me say this before, but I notice that I say it all the time, that we're meant to read the Gospels as a story that has a plot that drives them forward. I like to use the word narrative because I studied English literature when I was at uni, and I've just got this idea in my mind that a narrative is something that builds and builds and builds and then reaches a climax and then resolves. And it's I don't know if you read the gospel that way, the gospels, as in the four books in the Bible that are called gospels. Um, but it's really important to read them that way. I say this because I think that we have a tendency to treat the gospels in tiny little sections for our devotional purpose. And when we do that, we ignore the big picture that they are trying to give us and the big emphasis that they're trying to push. These books are not meant to be just summarized down into cute little verses or pithy little sayings or even nice little stories. They are a part of a big story. They are a story that has a plot that drives them forward. And this is true of John's Gospel as well. It's a book. It's a gospel. It's 21 chapters, I think, and it's not just to be treated as a single page or even a single verse or a single passage. And I hope that you've seen that as we've been reading through the Gospels over the last few months. I hope that you've seen that these are actually big stories that fit into the broader story of what God is doing in the world and how He sent His Son Jesus to redeem us. Today's passage that we have is a particularly iconic story. It's one that is often treated in isolation from the rest of the Gospel of John because it's such a captivating story. Jesus with his friends, Jesus weeps, or Jesus wept, as it's famously said. This story, yeah, it's often preached on at funerals, and yeah, we use it to talk about the humanity of Jesus, and rightly so, because all of these things feature so prominently in this story. There's plenty of preaching fodder in this story. Certainly one that if it were to come up in a preaching schedule, all the preachers would fight over who gets to do this one because there's so much quality material in there. But if we just look at this story and we don't focus on the broader gospel story that it fits within, we might miss some of what's happening in this story. So that's what I want to do today. I want to look at this story, not in detail, but to focus on how this story fits into the big story that John is trying to tell in his gospel. So let's do that. John's Gospel, it has traditionally been split into two halves. The first half is called the Book of Signs because it's all about the signs that Jesus performs, the miracles that he performs. And the second half of the Gospel is called traditionally the Book of Glory because it is about Jesus being glorified. The moment of Jesus' greatest glory in John's Gospel is when he is propped up on a cross, which seems not very glorious at all, but that is the upside down world of God's kingdom. And so the story that we look at today, John chapter 11, it is the last sign in the book of signs. In John chapter 13, we're going to start the book of glory. So what we see here is we see a summary story, a climactic end to the first half of the gospel, and we also see a transition into the second half. That's what's happening here. Climax and transition into the second half. So let's talk about the first half. As you've probably noticed, Jesus clashes heads very regularly with the religious leaders. They question him about where he's come from. They question him about the miracles, the signs that he's performing. They question him about him claiming God to be his father. And even a few times they've sought to stone him, but it's never eventuated. Jesus, in the end of chapter 10, he has retreated from the religious leaders, from the Pharisees' turf, and he's left Jerusalem, and he's gone down to the Jordan River, which is where John the Baptist did most of his ministry. At the end of chapter 10, that's where he went. It's about a day's walk away, and when he gets there, we're told that many who were there believed in him. Now that's important because the Gospel of John is about believing in Jesus. John, at the end of his Gospel, he says to his readers, I've written these things so that you might believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, and that by believing you might have life in his name. That's the goal. So we read the story, and we often read about people who believe, and we're meant to follow in their belief. And we often read about people who do not believe, and we're meant to be warned by their unbelief. And we're meant to look for the clues of why didn't they believe? What's going on here? Anyway, so we get to the end of this story about belief and unbelief, about the signs that Jesus is doing and the way that people are responding to them. And all of it brings to mind something that John said in the prologue. In the first 18 verses, he explains who Jesus is and where Jesus has come from. And the nucleus of the prologue, the kind of core at the heart of it, has this really important summary. He says, Jesus came to his own, this is verse 11 of chapter 1, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So Jesus comes to his own, that's the Jewish people, and his own did not receive him. But to those who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. So let's see how this plays its way out in this summary story, this climactic end story in the first half of John's Gospel. Now, we won't go through the death of Lazarus in detail, the story. Please read it today if you haven't already. Great story. But we're just going to jump into the final scene where Jesus is standing before the tomb of Lazarus. He's been dead for 4 days, and Jesus prays that the people who were there, the Jewish people who were there, that they would believe. And then Jesus performs this sign, and he asks for the stone to be rolled away, and Lazarus comes out of the tomb alive. And it tells us that many do believe. And through believing, they become children of God. But we also see in this story that Jesus comes to his own, but some do not receive him. There are others who are present who run off with this evidence that they have to the Pharisees, and they tell the Pharisees what has happened. So that the Pharisees continue to plot about how they will kill Jesus. Jesus has clashed with the Pharisees a lot. And if you haven't noticed, their reaction whenever Jesus performs a sign is to ignore the sign and just become grumpy about something to do with it. Jesus did it on the Sabbath day. Jesus is claiming that God is his Father. And here they're grumpy. We read what they're grumpy about in verse 47 and 48. They say, here is this man performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. See, again, they are completely ignoring the sign that is right in front of their eyes. Jesus has brought a dead person back to life. But they're not focused on that. What they're focused on is the fact that if everyone believes in Jesus, then they'll lose their nation and their temple to the Romans. He came to his own, but his own did not receive him. And we have this, we're at the middle of this transition moment in the gospel. Like I said before, we're going from the book of signs to the book of glory, which is about the death of Jesus. And we see that transition happening in verse 50, because Caiaphas, who was the high priest, he speaks up and he says, you know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish. And John, the gospel writer, he tells us that actually Caiaphas has spoken truer than he knew. Have a look, verse 51. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and to make them one. To those who did receive him, he gave the right to become children of God. So what we see here is a summary, a climactic summary of what we've seen so far, and a transition to the second half. So I hope you're looking forward to reading about Jesus' glory as he goes to the cross. But at the end of the book of Signs, I want you to think about these questions for yourself. What have you thought as you've come across these miracles? Are I think our culture has a presupposition that miracles don't happen, or the miracles recorded in the Bible. Sure, Jesus might have done wonderful things, but they're not as extravagant or as real as the Bible reports them to be. What are your thoughts about the possibility of miracles? These are signs as well. They're not just miracles to be seen in and of themselves and to serve their own purpose. They're meant to point to something about the person who performs them. What conclusions have you come to about Jesus from these miracles? And the last one I want you to think about is, how much do you believe that these miracles that Jesus performs, these signs, are powerful to convince other people to believe in Jesus? Because that's what they're there for. John says, I write these things so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. Enjoy the rest of your day.